The golden suns of Draventos Prime cast long shadows across the eternal gardens, where crystalline flowers bloomed in patterns that spelled out the names of the dead. Tourists from 100 worlds wandered the pathways, their translators chirping softly as guides explained the history of the dragons who had once kept peace among the stars. On the highest cliff, overlooking everything, sat Kaelsrath. He had not moved in 3 years. Before that, he had not moved for 5 years. The pattern stretched back 3 centuries, broken only by the occasional shift of wings or the slow blink of amber eyes that burned like dying stars. His scales were black as the void between galaxies, and his body was so massive that entire families could stand in the shadow of his head alone. People came to see him every day. They took pictures. They whispered theories about why the last dragon refused to speak. Some left offerings at the base of his cliff. Flowers, crystals, written prayers in 1,000 languages. He never acknowledged any of it. The Galactic Council had tried everything. They sent their best diplomats, beings trained in 17 forms of communication. They sent telepaths who could speak mind to mind, the way dragons once did. They even sent survivors of other genocides, hoping shared pain might break through his walls. Kaelsrath remained silent as stone. He died inside when his people died. The tour guides would say, his body just forgot to stop. The guides told the story the same way every time, their voices practiced and smooth. 300 years ago, the dragons had been the greatest peacekeepers in known space. They did not fight wars or threaten violence. They simply spoke, their telepathic voices so clear and wise that even ancient enemies would lay down weapons to listen. For 10,000 years, they had prevented conflicts that would have burned entire sectors of the galaxy to ash. Then came the Vector Collective. The Vector were a hive-minded species, all their thoughts connected in a single vast network. The dragons had worked with them for centuries, helping them negotiate with individual-minded species who found the Vector frightening. The Vector called the dragons their closest allies, their truest friends. It was a lie built over generations. When the Vector struck, they struck everywhere at once. They had learned where every dragon lived, where every egg was kept, where the young ones trained. In a single coordinated attack that lasted 6 hours, they used weapons specifically designed to kill telepaths, machines that turn a dragon's own mind against itself, that made their greatest gift into a weapon of torture. Kaelsrath had been off-world when it happened, meeting with a trade delegation. He felt every death to the telepathic network that connected all dragons. He felt his mate die. He felt his daughter die. He felt the younglings die, their minds bright and confused, now understanding why the pain would not stop. He felt the elders die, still trying to send warnings to protect those who might escape. By the time he returned to the dragon homeworld, there was nothing left but silence and ash. The Vector Collective collapsed 3 days later. Without the dragons to help them communicate with the wider galaxy, their hive mind turned inward, consuming itself in confusion and guilt. The few Vector who survived scattered to the edges of known space, their unified consciousness shattered forever. It was no comfort to Kaelsrath. Revenge meant nothing. Justice meant nothing. His people were gone, and the galaxy they had died protecting continued on without them. He flew to Draventos Prime, to the world where the Galactic Council had built a memorial for the fallen dragons. He landed on the cliff overlooking the eternal flames that burned for his people. And then he stopped. He stopped speaking. He stopped moving. He stopped being anything but a monument to grief. Now, 3 centuries later, he remained. The gardens had grown around him. Trees planted as saplings had grown tall and died of old age. Species rose and fell in the galactic community. Technology advanced. The universe continued its endless spinning forward. And Kaelsrath sat, silent as a grave, his eyes fixed on the flames below. The security team that monitored him had changed shifts thousands of times. New guards would ask the old ones if the dragon had ever responded to anything. The answer was always the same. No, he breathed, his massive chest rising and falling once every few minutes. His eyes blinked, slow and mechanical. But he was not truly alive. He was a shell, wrapped around a wound that would never heal. At sunset, The golden light turned his black scales to bronze. The crowds thinned as the gardens prepared to close. Another day ended, identical to all the days before it. Kale's wrath did not notice. He had stopped noticing anything long ago. Thomas Chun was 12 years old and tired of being invisible. His parents lived in a research station on Derventos Prime, surrounded by artifacts and ancient texts, their faces always buried in holographic displays. They worked 16 hours a day, sometimes more. When they looked at Thomas, their eyes went somewhere else, somewhere sad and far away. He knew why. His sister Sarah had died 6 months ago in a shuttle accident. She had been 17, bright and loud and full of dreams. Now there was just Thomas, quiet and small, and not enough to fill the hole she left behind. So Thomas walked. The research station was boring, full of adults who spoke in technical terms he did not care about. But the Eternal Gardens were close, just a short tram ride away, and the security guards recognized him. They waved him through without questions. Most visitors came to gardens in groups, following tour guides who pointed at monuments and explained history. Thomas avoided them. He found a bench near the base of the cliff where the dragon sat, far enough from the main paths that people rarely walked by. It was quiet there. The crystalline flowers chimed softly in the wind, and the eternal flames crackled in their bronze bowls. He sat down and pulled out his sketchbook. Thomas was not a great artist, but drawing helped. It gave his hand something to do, his mind something to focus on besides the empty feeling in his chest. He drew the flowers first, trying to capture the way light moved through their translucent petals. Then the flames, which was harder because they never stayed still. Then the strange spiral patterns in the memorial stones. He did not draw the dragon. That felt wrong somehow, like staring at someone who wanted to be left alone. On his second visit, he brought a thermos of hot chocolate. His mother had made it without thinking, muscle memory from when she used to pack drinks for both her children. She handed it to Thomas with a confused look, as if surprised to find him still there in the kitchen. He took it and left before the sadness in her eyes could spread to him. The hot chocolate was good. He sipped it slowly on his bench, watching the moons rise over the gardens. 3 moons, each a different color, silver, blue, and pale orange. Sarah would have loved them. She had wanted to be a pilot, to fly between worlds and see everything the galaxy had to offer. Thomas came back the next day, and the day after that, the security guards began to recognize the pattern. The human boy is here again, they would report in their daily logs. No interaction with the dragon, just sitting, no concerns. The tourists noticed him too. Sometimes a few took pictures, thinking perhaps the small human was part of some ritual they did not understand. Most ignored him. Children were common in the gardens. School groups came through every week. But Thomas was different. He came alone. He stayed for hours. And he never tried to approach Kale's wrath. 3 weeks passed. Thomas's sketchbook filled with drawings of the gardens from every angle. He started bringing homework, though he rarely finished it. Math problems seemed pointless when he could not stop thinking about how Sarah used to help him with fractions, making up silly songs so he would remember the steps. One evening, as the sun began to set, Thomas started talking. He did not talk to the dragon. He did not even look at the dragon. He just talked, his voice quiet and a little shaky, like he was testing out words he had kept locked inside for too long. I don't know if time is supposed to make it better, he said to no one, his eyes on his sketchbook. Everyone says it will. Even the grief counselor at school says it. But it's been 6 months, and it still feels like yesterday. He drew a jagged line across the page, not part of any picture. My parents don't talk to me anymore. Not really. They ask if I ate breakfast or if I finished homework. But they don't ask how I am. I think they're scared of the answer. Or maybe they just don't see me. Maybe when they look at me, they only see her missing. His hand stopped moving. The charcoal pencil trembled slightly. I miss her so much it feels like something broke inside my chest and the pieces are still sharp. Is that normal? Does everyone feel like this? The gardens were quiet except for the wind in the crystal flowers. The flames burned steady in their bowls. The moons climbed higher in the darkening sky. Thomas wiped his eyes with his sleeve and went back to drawing. High above him on the cliff, Kaelsrath's amber eyes shifted. For the first time in years, they focused downward. The dragon's head tilted just slightly, by less than an inch. He listened. Thomas kept coming back. Every evening after school, he would take the tram to the Eternal Gardens, walk past the tourists and the memorial stones, and sit on his bench near the cliff. Sometimes he drew. Sometimes he did homework. Sometimes he just sat and watched the sky change colors. And sometimes he talked. He told stories about Sarah, how she used to wake him up by dumping cold water on his face, how she made the worst pancakes in the universe, burned on the outside and raw in the middle, but she was so proud of them that he ate them anyway, how she taught him to whistle, though he was still not very good at it. She wanted to fly, Thomas said one evening, his breath making small clouds in the cooling air, not just pilot shuttle for work. She wanted to see everything. The crystal caves on Meridian 7, the floating cities of Thessia, the places where stars are born. He paused, swallowing hard. She had a whole list, 43 places she wanted to visit before she turned 30. The wind moved to the crystal flowers, making them sing their soft, chiming song. I found the list in her room. Mom and Dad haven't touched anything in there. It's like a museum. But I went in and found her datapad under her pillow. The list was the last thing she looked at. His voice cracked. Number 44 was blank. She was going to add another place. She ran out of time. Thomas wiped his face with both hands. He had stopped being embarrassed about crying here. The gardens felt safe somehow, private, even though people walked past sometimes. What he did not know was that high above him, Kaelsrath had begun to remember. The dragon's mind had been locked tight for 3 centuries, a vault sealed against pain too enormous to bear. But the human boy's voice was slipping through cracks. Small things at first. The sound of young laughter. The way hope feels before the universe takes it away. Kaelsrath remembered his daughter, Vera. She had loved the sound of stellar winds, the radiation songs that only dragons could hear when they flew between stars. She would dive through gas clouds just to feel the harmonics change, her young mind bright with joy at every new pattern. She had been planning a journey to the galactic core, where the oldest stars sang together in frequencies so complex they could make a dragon weep with beauty. She never got to go. The memory hurt like a fresh wound. Kaelsrath's massive body tensed, his claws digging slightly into the stone beneath him. For a moment, he almost retreated back into silence, back into the safe numbness where nothing could hurt him. But the boy was still talking. The worst part is that I'm angry at her, Thomas said, his voice small. I know that's stupid. It wasn't her fault. The shuttle malfunction was just bad luck, bad timing, just the universe being random and unfair. But I'm angry anyway. Angry that she left. Angry that she gets to be the one everyone misses while I'm the one who has to keep existing in this half-empty life. He pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself smaller on the bench. Does that make me a bad person? Being angry at someone who died? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Thomas had not expected an answer. He never did. But something changed. The wind shifted direction. The temperature dropped slightly. And Thomas felt something he could not quite name. A presence, like someone had just sat down next to him even though he was still alone on the bench. It was not quite a voice. It was deeper than sound, gentler than thought. It was understanding, flowing from somewhere above him, washing over his mind like warm water. Anger is love with nowhere to go. Thomas's head snapped up. He looked around wildly, his heart suddenly pounding. "Hello," he called out. Who said that? No one was near him. The gardens were almost empty now, just a few visitors in the distance. He looked up at the cliff, at the massive black dragon silhouetted against the evening sky. Kaelsrath had not moved. His eyes were still open, still fixed on the flames below. But something was different. The dragon was not just stone anymore. He was present in a way he had not been before. Thomas stood up slowly, his sketchbook forgotten on the bench. "Was that you?" There was no response, not in words. But the presence remained, and with it came a feeling Thomas had not experienced since his sister died. He felt seen. He felt heard. He felt less alone. That night, it began to rain. Thomas stood to leave, gathering his things. But as the first drops fell, a shadow moved above him. A massive wing extended from the cliff, covering his bench like a roof, keeping him dry. Thomas looked up at Kaelsrath with wide eyes. The dragon's gaze remained on the flames, but his wing stayed exactly where it was needed. The security team noticed the wing first. Their monitoring systems flagged movement on the cliff, something that had not happened in over a year. Within minutes, the alert reached the Galactic Council's offices. Within an hour, 3 ships were in orbit above Derventos Prime, carrying diplomats who had waited decades for this moment. By morning, everything had changed. Thomas arrived at the gardens to find reporters blocking the entrance. Cameras hovered in the air like mechanical insects. A Centaurian diplomat tried to stop him at the gate, her forearms gesturing frantically. "Young human, we need to speak with you about your connection to Kaelsrath. We have many questions. The Council requires a full report of your interactions and methods." Thomas stared at her, confused and frightened. "I just sit there. I don't do anything." "Clearly you do something," she insisted. "The dragon moved for you. He has not moved for anyone in years. You must tell us your technique." "I don't have a technique," Thomas said, his voice rising. "I just talk sometimes. Can I please go to my bench?" They did not let him through. More officials arrived, and then more. His parents came too, pulled from their research by urgent messages. His mother looked more awake than she had in months, but it was fear in her eyes now, not grief. "Thomas, what have you been doing?" his father asked, not angry but bewildered. "Sitting," Thomas said. "Just sitting. I told you I was going to the gardens." His mother's face crumpled. We weren't paying attention. We should have asked more questions." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Xenopsychologists presented theories about human empathy and its effects on traumatized species. Politicians argued about whether Thomas should be restricted from the gardens for Kaelsrath's protection, or whether he should be encouraged to continue for the good of galactic diplomacy. News feeds across 100 worlds carried the story. Human child reaches last dragon. Thomas hated all of it. He did not want to be famous. He did not want scientists studying him or politicians making decisions about his friendship, because that was what it was. He realized, somehow impossibly, he had become friends with a 300-year-old dragon. For 3 days, they kept him away from the gardens. His parents stayed close now, protective and guilty. They talked to him, really talked, for the first time since Sarah died. They apologized for disappearing into their grief. They held him while he cried. It was good, but it was also complicated, because part of Thomas was angry that it took all this attention to make them see him again. On the 4th day, his mother made a decision. "You're going back to the gardens," she said. "Whatever is happening between you and Kaelsrath, it's real. It's not about politics or science. The Council can argue all they want, but they can't stop you from visiting a public memorial." His father nodded. "We'll go with you. Make sure they leave you alone." The gardens were crowded when they arrived. Barriers had been set up, keeping tourists farther from the cliff. Security forces from 3 different species stood guard, but Thomas's mother walked right through them, her hand tight on Thomas's shoulder, and somehow no one stopped him. Thomas sat on his bench. His parents stood a respectful distance away, close enough to protect him, but far enough to give him space. He looked up at Kaelsrath. The dragon had not moved since that rainy evening. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I miss coming here." The presence returned immediately, warm and familiar in his mind. Not words this time, but feeling, relief, welcome, something that might have been the dragon equivalent of a smile. Thomas pulled out his homework, trying to ignore the cameras and the watching crowds. He did not get much done. It was hard to focus on history assignments when the weight of 100 stairs pressed against his back. Then the alarms began. A ship descended through the atmosphere without clearance, moving fast. It landed at the edge of the gardens, and figures emerged. They were Vector, or what remained of that species, smaller than they used to be, their hive mind broken into individual fragments. There were 7 of them, and they moved with desperate purpose toward the cliff. "We seek forgiveness," their leader called out, his voice amplified by a translator. We carry the shame of our ancestors. Let us speak to Kale's wrath. Let us atone. Security forces moved to intercept them, but the Vector were fast. They broke through the first line, heading straight for the cliff. One of them veered toward Thomas's bench. Everything happened at once. Kale's wrath moved. He did not simply shift or adjust. He launched himself from the cliff with speed that seemed impossible for something so massive. His wings spread wide, blotting out the suns. He landed between Thomas and the Vector with an impact that shook the ground, his body a wall of black scales and ancient fury. And then, for the first time in 300 years, Kale's wrath spoke aloud. His voice was not sound. It was force, a telepathic wave that crashed across the gardens, across the city, across the entire planet. Every mind within range felt it, a single word burning with grief and determination and protective rage. No. The Vector froze. Their leader collapsed to his knees, all 6 limbs trembling. The telepathic word had hit them hardest, carrying 3 centuries of pain and refusal. They had come seeking forgiveness, but Kale's wrath's answer was absolute. Security forces surrounded them quickly, but the Vector did not resist. They simply knelt there, their heads bowed, understanding finally that some wounds do not heal with apologies. Thomas sat on his bench, his heart hammering, staring up at the dragon who had just protected him. Kale's wrath's wings were still spread wide, his massive body tense and ready. Slowly, very slowly, the dragon turned his head and looked down at Thomas. Their eyes met for the first time. Kale's wrath's amber gaze was deep and sad and ancient, but it was not empty anymore. There was life in those eyes. There was purpose. Are you harmed? The thought was gentle, so different from the thunderous no that had shaken the planet. Thomas shook his head, unable to speak. Good. The dragon's wings folded carefully, and he settled on the ground near the bench, still between Thomas and the rest of the world. I am sorry I frightened you. You didn't, Thomas managed to say, his voice shaky. You saved me. Thank you. The Galactic Council arrived within the hour, but everything had changed. They could not ignore what had happened. Kale's wrath had chosen, not for politics, not for diplomacy, but for a simple connection with a grieving human child. The Vector were scored away. Their request for forgiveness was officially denied. The council made it clear that Kale's wrath owed them nothing, that their ancestors' crimes could not be washed away by the desperation of survivors. And then, surprisingly, the council did something wise. They cleared the gardens. They moved the barriers back. They gave Thomas and Kale's wrath space. Over the following weeks, Thomas learned what it meant to speak with a dragon, not in words, though sometimes Kale's wrath used those, but in memories and feelings, in understanding that flowed both ways. Kale's wrath showed Thomas what it felt like to fly between stars, to hear the songs of solar winds, to touch the edges of nebulas that glowed like frozen fire. He shared memories of his daughter Vera, her joy and curiosity, the way she had loved every new discovery. Thomas shared his own memories of Sarah, her terrible singing voice that she insisted was perfect, the way she defended him from bullies at school, how she made up stories about the constellations, giving them names like the Cosmic Potato and Gerald the Star Blob. She sounds wonderful, Kale's wrath said, and his mental voice carried warmth that made Thomas's chest ache in a good way. She was, Thomas said. So was Vera. They sat together in the gardens as the seasons changed. Thomas came less often now, which was healthy. He had made friends at school, joined a youth engineering club that built model spacecraft. His parents were present again, really present, eating dinners together and asking about his day. But when Thomas did visit, Kale's wrath was always glad to see him. Something else changed, too. The dragon began allowing others to approach. Not everyone, and never crowds, but people who carried deep grief, who had lost everything and did not know how to continue. These people, Kale's wrath allowed to sit in his presence. He rarely spoke to them, but they sat in the gardens, in the quiet space near the cliff, and somehow that was enough. Just knowing that someone else understood, that someone else had survived the unsurvivable, gave them strength to keep going. A year passed. Then, too, Thomas grew taller, his voice deeper. He applied to the pilot academy, following his sister's dream in his own way. When he got his acceptance letter, he brought it to show Kale's wrath. "I'm scared," he admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I'm only doing this because of her?" "You are doing it because she showed you it was possible," Kale's wrath said. "That is not the same as doing it for her. Your sister opened a door. You are choosing to walk through it. That choice is yours alone." Thomas folded the letter carefully. Will you still be here? "When I come back, I will be here." The dragon's tone carried certainty. "I am not leaving. Not anymore." "Good," Thomas said and smiled. Years later, decades later, Thomas returned to Gerventos Prime as a decorated pilot. He had seen 38 of places on Sarah's list and added 17 of his own. He had loved and lost, succeeded and failed, lived a full and complicated human life. He sat on his old bench, now gray-haired and tired, and looked up at his friend. "I did it," he said simply. "I know," Kalesrath replied. "I am proud of you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the 3 moons rose over the eternal gardens, where the names of the dead were written in crystal flowers, and where the last dragon had learned that even the deepest silence could be broken by a simple act of sitting beside someone in their pain.